1944, I wasn't yet 20 years old, flying torpedo bombers off the USS San Jacinto on the other side of the world.
President George H.W. Bush speaking to a crowd in Italy, spending Memorial Day abroad back in 1989. President Bush spoke of his own experience and those shared by both American and Italian soldiers during World War II. As we reflect on our fallen heroes today, it is worth noting that many presidents throughout our history have served in our military and on the battlefield. President Bush 41 was our most recent chief executive to have served in a combat role. So what might set those presidents apart from those who did not see combat or spend time in uniform? For more, let's welcome in Craig Shirley, president of Shirley and Bannister Public Affairs. He is also the author of the book, Reagan's Revolution, the Untold Story of the Campaign That Started It All. Craig, it's good to have you here, and it's worth noting that military service is not a prerequisite for presidential success, but you turn to literally the father of our country, George Washington. Did his time in uniform leading the revolution make him the popular choice to become our first president?
Yes, it most certainly did. Washington, of course, led the revolution for 7 years. He was chosen somewhat surprisingly. John Hancock thought he would become named the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Revolutionary Forces. But Washington displayed enormous wisdom. He rarely fought the British in open combat. Instead employed what was called a Fabian strategy, named after a Roman dictator, where a smaller, faster, more nimble force would pick at the sides and pick at the outsides of a superior force and wear them down. He also knew, of course, that the British supply lines were 3,000 miles long across an ocean, so that he engaged in a war of attrition, and for this, he was the only one. He got a unanimous electoral vote for his victory. It's hard to imagine how hugely popular he really was as President of the United States and at the end of the Revolution.
And we move from the Revolution to our Civil War era in the wake of the war between the states. Once the country came back together, Ulysses S. Grant eventually became the President of the United States. History has not treated U.S. Grant well, although he wrote memoirs that are highly regarded. Your assessment of General turned President Grant?
I think is that history's been fairly accurate about U.S. Grant. Military service does not always translate into executive service. So obviously George Washington was a successful commander-in-chief and was a successful president. Andrew Jackson was a successful commander in the field, and he also is regarded as a successful president. But it's not always a truism. U.S. Grant, more than any other Union general, won the Civil War. I think the North would have won eventually, but he forced a sooner conclusion to it than Meade or any of the other commanders who Lincoln replaced. But he was as decisive as he was in the field, and he was very decisive in the field. He was indecisive as President of the United States, and often surrounded himself with bad men or men with shady characters. So it's interesting because there's not always a correlation between being a good commander and being commander-in-chief.
Craig, a little less than 2 minutes remain. We would be remiss if we did not mention the supreme Allied commander in Europe during World War II, who became president when we arrived on the planet, Dwight David Eisenhower. You look at Ike through the years, and again, like others, there has been a reassessment of his presidency and his stewardship of the Oval Office.
Very much so. Again, that's a case where good commander translated into a good president, but he was also underestimated as commander, just as he was underestimated as president of the United States. You know, World War II changed everything for everybody, and for some people it changed them forever. Dwight Eisenhower was, before World War II, was a clerk on the staff of General Douglas MacArthur, but who knew that the war would propel him, as it did Patton, Omar Bradley, and so many other people, into positions of leadership and into the annals of history. And of course he did. You know, Ike became world famous, especially after the D-Day invasion. and it made him a natural to be president of the United States. In fact, our last general, there have been 7 Americans who were generals first and then presidents later. He was our last general who was elected president of the United States. And I think, too, is that you're absolutely right. History is revising its view of his presidency and has put him more recently in the category of near great presidents, which is vastly improved over where historians put him in 1960 and 1961.
Craig Shirley, it remains to be seen if military veterans will reemerge in the years to come as presidential favorites. But on this Memorial Day, we thank you very much for your insights and your knowledge of history. Craig Shirley, thanks so much for your time, and Newsmax Prime will continue.